My name is Brian. I'm going to be discussing Pi-hole today. I'm going to be talking about what is Pi-hole, what's the importance of Pi-hole, and how to set it up. So Pi-hole is a Raspberry Pi software that can turn your Raspberry Pi into a DNS server to filter ad traffic. Now, the reason this is important is a lot of devices don't come with potential ad blocks. On the computer, you can get several forms of ad blocks in your Chrome browser or whatever browser you're using, but this is much harder on devices such as an Xbox or PlayStation or your phone. And so a DNS server would block everything on your entire network. To start off, the materials that you'll need are a SD card, a Raspberry Pi, a case for your Raspberry Pi, a power supply, and then optionally you're going to need a power sync. And then once you have all that, you're going to have to obviously set it up. So here's a picture of what the Raspberry Pi looks like when it's out of the case. Here's a picture of the power sync. And the first thing you're going to want to do is put on the power sync if you have them, which I do in this picture. Afterwards, you're able to set up everything. You can just put on the case. So for our Raspberry Pi's OS, we're going to be using Raspbian Stretch Lite. And in order to format that, I'm going to be using Balena Etcher. And I'll demonstrate that in this quick video. It's very straightforward. All you have to do is select your image, which I said we use Raspbian Stretch Lite. And then you just have to mount it. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to skip ahead a bit because it takes about 5 minutes to mount. Once you have the SD card mounted with the OS that you want, you're going to want to open up your file manager and navigate to your SD card. And once you're in there, you're going to want to set up a file. It's going to be a blank file, so make it just a text document that's blank, and make sure it has the file extension, and you're going to name it SSH. This will give you the ability to remotely access your Raspberry Pi without having to connect it to a monitor, and without the need to put in a keyboard to your Raspberry Pi. It just makes things way easier, in my opinion. Now, once you have an operating system on your SD card, you can finally assemble the whole Raspberry Pi. And in order to do this, all you have to do is stick the SD card into the slot in your Raspberry Pi, and you're all good to go. Once everything's assembled, you're going to want to plug it in, and that is, you're going to want to plug in the power supply as well as the Ethernet cable. And once you have all that set up, everything should be up and running, and that's what we're going to check for right now. In order to check that everything's running, you're going to want to go onto your router. I checked on my phone first because it was just straightforward for me. As you see in this picture, you can see that the Raspberry comes up as an active device on my network. It's enabled right here in the picture. And so that's great. It shows that everything's working and it's showing up on my router itself. But you're going to want to access your router's IP address in order to configure the Raspberry Pi to make it a static IP so that we can remotely access it through the SSH file that we implemented earlier. In this short clip, I demonstrate how I did this through my Verizon Fios website. For me, it was pretty straightforward. I just had to go to the Advanced tab. I went to IP address distribution, and then I clicked on connection list. And once we're in there, you can see all my connections, but we're looking for the Raspberry Pi. And right now it's a dynamic IP address, but we're going to want that to be a static one so that it doesn't change and that we can always connect through it remotely. And once you set up a static connection for your IP address, you're going to want to write that down because that's what we're going to be accessing remotely. So once you get everything set up, we're going to be accessing the Raspberry Pi remotely so that we can download and install Pi-hole. So in order to do this, I'm using the application known as MobaXterm. There's plenty other applications you could use, but this one was the most readily available to me, so it's what I'm using in this video. And in order to do this with MobaXterm, all you have to do is start a new session and start it as an SSH session. And you're going to want to put in the static IP address as well as make sure it's on port 22. After that, you're going to want to put in the username and password, which has a default username of Pi and password of Raspberry. And once you do that, I'm just going to change my password so it's no longer the default one. In order to do that, you just have to put in the command passwd, and then that allows you to change the password. I definitely recommend this. Once you do that, you're going to want to copy and paste this code, which installs Pi-hole directly onto your device. After that, it will start to install, and you're going to want to follow the steps of Pi-hole, which I do in this clip. So right now it's just installing packages. This is pretty straightforward. It just has to retrieve the files and download them onto your Raspberry Pi. It then tells you this installer will transform your device into a network ad blocker, which is exactly what we want. It tells us that we're going to need a static IP, which we luckily already have. So for our upstream DNS provider, we're going to be using Cloudflare. I did some research and this is supposed to be the best one. It's just the provider that's going to be filtering the ads. And once you do that, you can also install third-party lists to do the same. I just left all the defaults on for this. It then asks if you want to use your current network settings as a static address, and of course we do. This is the IP address that I had from earlier. And then it warns us that our router could still try to assign this IP to a device. This could happen, but it's pretty unlikely. It then asks if we would like to install the web server. This allows you to access your Pi-hole remotely through the web browser. It's a really nice function, so I left it on, which it recommends. I also logged queries. It lets you see what it filters and what it doesn't filter, which is nice. As for privacy mode, I just left this on default. I didn't really plan on using a privacy mode. It then goes about installing the packages to the custom specifications that you provided. And then it gives you the web interface login so that you can check your Pi-hole status and see if it's working, if it's filtering everything, which we're going to go check right now. But before Pi-hole can go about filtering the ads, you're going to want to make sure that your Raspberry Pi is a DNS server itself. And this really depends on what type of router you have. For me, I had Verizon, and so I was able to just go on their website, and you'll see in this picture that I was able to just set this address as a DNS server. And that allowed me to filter addresses through it. If we look through the console now, the admin console, you can see that I had a total queries of 752. And the domains on the block list are about 92,000. These were all lists from the provider that we selected previously in the tutorial. The query log shows what's been forwarded and what's been blocked, so it shows that it is blocking ads, which is great. It shows you what type of queries are most often, as well as the top blocked domains and top permitted domains. So the way Pi-hole works is it acts as the DNS server between you and the content that you are attempting to access. And in doing so, it filters anything that comes in between you and the internet. In this case, it's filtering domains that it receives before they come to you, thus blocking you from even seeing them in the first place. Of course, the service is not perfect. There are potential downsides, and that being a lot of applications on your phone, for instance, host their own ads within their platform, while a lot of websites also host their own ads within their own content. And in this case, it would be impossible to block the ad without blocking the content. You'll see this a lot on like Facebook or Instagram, where a lot of the ads are hosted within Facebook's own network and server. And so in order to block their ads, you'd have to block the Facebook network in general, which is impossible if you're attempting to actually use the application. So while the service is not perfect, it does accomplish a good amount, and it's really cool, and it was a really neat project to work on.